At the lip of the cracks of doom, Frodo Baggins turned, looked at Sam, and said the sentence that should have ended the world. "The ring is mine." After 60 years of Bilbo's keeping, after 17 years in a drawer at Bag End, after 6 months of crawling toward this single fire, the quest failed, at the very last step. And yet the ring was unmade. To understand how, we have to understand what the ring actually was. Not a magic trinket, not a jewel of enchantment, something stranger. Something Tolkien worked out across 3 decades of letters and drafts, piece by piece, until it became perhaps the most precisely engineered object in all of modern fantasy. A portion of a living being poured into gold, a network with 16 endpoints, a bond that could only be broken in the fire that made it. This is how the One Ring actually works. There is a question about the One Ring that most of us have asked at some point, perhaps without quite realizing we were asking it. How does it actually work? Not what does it do. We know what it does. It makes the wearer invisible. It extends life, it corrupts, it calls to its master. These are the surface features, familiar to anyone who has read the books or watched the films. But underneath those features sits a mechanism, a set of rules, a metaphysical architecture that Tolkien worked out with remarkable precision over decades of revision, and explained in letter after letter, until, by the end of his life, he had given us something far stranger than a magic ring. I'm your host here at Ranger of the Realms, and what I want to do in this episode is take the One Ring apart, carefully, in order, and show you how its parts fit together. Here is the framing that will help most. The ring is not a battery. It is not a reservoir of power that Sauron filled up and that runs down when used. It is a bond, a living connection between maker, object, and world. Every action involving it, wearing, touching, claiming, destroying, alters that tether. And once you see the ring as a bond rather than a battery, almost everything that seems strange about it begins to make sense. What Tolkien built is layered. There is an elvish logic underneath, shared with every one of the great rings, which is about preservation, the slowing of decay, the keeping of things as they are. There is a Sauron-specific layer on top of that, which adds domination and the shifting between seen and unseen worlds. And then there is the unique master ring logic of the One, which binds the other rings to itself and channels the will of its wearer into every mind that touches them. Most confusion about the ring comes from conflating these 3 layers, so let us separate them. Let us start where Tolkien started, with the forging. In the fires of Orodruin, sometime around the year 1600 of the Second Age, Sauron did something that no one in the legendarium had ever done before. He took a substantial portion of his own inner being, his Fëa, his Maiar spirit, the essence of what he was, and he poured it into a piece of gold. We have to sit with this for a moment, because it is genuinely strange, and the strangeness is the whole point. Sauron was not a wizard. He was not a sorcerer working with external forces. He was one of the Ainur, one of the angelic spirits who helped sing the world into being, and whatever power he had was intrinsic to his nature. He could not reach outside himself and grab more. The only way to create an object capable of mastering the elven rings, which Tolkien calls a thing of surpassing potency, was to put himself into it. Gandalf, sitting by the fire at Bag End, explains this to Frodo with a precision that is easy to miss on first reading. He says, "He made that ring himself, it is his, and he let a great part of his own former power pass into it, so that he could rule all the others." A great part of his own former power passed into it. The forging, then, was not a spell cast on the ring. It was a transaction in which Sauron traded permanence of self for functional reach. Before that moment, all of his power was contained in his own being. After it, a substantial fraction of it lived in the ring, and his being was in what Tolkien calls rapport with the object, a permanent, unbreakable channel between the two. This is why the ring is an extension of Sauron, rather than a possession of his. The relationship between a person and an object is that the object can be lost without changing the person. The relationship between Sauron and the ring is that if the ring is destroyed, Sauron himself, as Tolkien wrote in Letter 211, is diminished to vanishing point, reduced to a shadow, a mere memory of malicious will. That phrase, diminished to vanishing point, tells you how much of himself he put in. There is a chilling demonstration of the entanglement in the history of Númenor. Sauron is taken to the island as a prisoner. He corrupts the king, he orchestrates the rebellion against the Valar, and when Númenor is drowned, his physical body is destroyed in the catastrophe. He ought, by any ordinary logic, to have been finished. But his spirit flees back to Middle-earth, and it carries the ring with it. Tolkien, when he was asked how a disembodied spirit could physically transport a metal object across the sea, gave a one-line answer that is often overlooked. I do not think one need boggle at this spirit carrying off the One Ring, upon which his power of dominating minds now largely depended. The ring was, by that point, not an accessory to Sauron's rule. It was the main conduit through which his will touched the world. He and it were a single, distributed being. That is the foundation. Everything else the ring does is built on top of this, the fact that it is part of Sauron, and Sauron is part of it. Now let us widen the frame, because the One Ring is not just about Sauron. Its very name, the ruling ring, tells us its real function. It was made to rule other rings. To understand this, we have to remember what the other rings were. In Eregion, around the year 1500 of the Second Age, the elven smiths under Celebrimbor began forging what would be called the Rings of Power. They did this under the tutelage of a fair-seeming stranger named Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, who was, of course, Sauron in disguise. The elves forged 16 rings with his help, and 3 more without him, in secret. All of them were potent. All of them carried the elvish preservation logic, the slowing of decay, the keeping of beauty from fading. And the 16 that Sauron helped with also carried, unknown to the smiths, a deeper pattern that would make them subject to whatever master ring he might later forge. Then he made the one. And in the Silmarillion, the effect is described in terms that are almost bureaucratic in their clarity. Its wearer could see the thoughts of all those that used the lesser rings, could govern all that they did, and in the end could utterly enslave them. See? Govern, enslave. 3 stages of increasing control. This is why the One is rightly called a domination machine. It is a master node in a network. A ring-bearer wearing one of the 16 was not simply a person with a magical object. They were a terminal, an end point, a being whose will could be observed and eventually overwritten by whoever wore the ruling ring. And the instant Sauron put the one on his finger in Orodruin, the network went live. The elves, 300 miles away in Eregion, felt it immediately. In that single moment, they perceived Sauron for what he was. They knew him, as the Silmarillion puts it, and perceived that he would be master of them. They tore their rings off in panic. The 3 were already too powerful and too pure in their making to be simply seized. Celebrimbor hid them. They were never worn while Sauron held the one, and for that reason they were never fully subjugated. But they were still bound. The Silmarillion is explicit. Their power was bound up with it, to be subject wholly to it, and to last only so long as it too should last. The 9, given to mortal men, produced the complete victory of the system. Those 9 kings, tempted by rings that stretched their lives, faded across centuries into the ring-wraiths, the Nazgul, beings of pure will and no remaining self, creatures whose every movement was ultimately an extension of Sauron's mind. They are what the system looks like at maximum efficiency. The 7, given to the Dwarf Lords, produced the only significant failure. Dwarves, Tolkien tells us in his late notes, were made by Aule from a different design than elves and men. Their essence was too hardy and unruly to be turned into wraiths. Their chief desire was for gold and for the making of things with their hands. The rings inflamed that desire. You can see the results in the dwarf kingdoms, but they could not subvert it. The dwarves were burned by their rings. They were not enslaved by them. The architecture had limits. Still, the architecture is breathtaking in its ambition. 1 ring, 16 endpoints. Through them, entire peoples. Through them, every mind that touches the lesser rings. A political magical system designed to unify Middle-earth under one will. That is the first thing the One Ring actually does. It runs the network. Now let us come to the most famous feature of the ring, the one every reader remembers first. You put it on, and you disappear. Except that is not what happens. It is a convenient simplification, but it is not the mechanism. And once you understand the real mechanism, a whole cluster of other apparent mysteries resolves at the same time. The ring does not hide you, it shifts you. Tolkien describes this directly in Letter 131. The rings, he writes, had powers rendering invisible the material body and making things of the invisible world visible. Read those 2 effects together. Invisibility and the ability to see the unseen are not 2 different tricks. They are the same trick, viewed from opposite sides. The world of Tolkien's legendarium has 2 sides, the seen and the unseen. Physical matter, bodies, landscapes, all of this belongs to the seen. Spirits, ghosts, the Maiar and Valar in their unbodied state, the wraiths, all of this belongs to the unseen. Most beings live on one side or the other. Elves straddle the boundary because their immortal nature gives them an unusually strong presence in both. Sauron, as a fallen Maiar, is largely an unseen being who has to take effort to manifest in matter. When a mortal puts on the One Ring, they are pulled partway out of the seen world and partway into the unseen. Their body becomes dim to physical eyes, but to anyone whose own perception includes the unseen, the Nazgul, Sauron himself, Glorfindel in his returned elven form, the wearer becomes glaringly, horribly visible, lit up like a signal fire. This is why the scene at Weathertop is so much more frightening than it first appears. Frodo slips the ring on, expecting to vanish. Instead, he finds himself in a different version of reality. The hooded Nazgul he had seen as shapeless black shadows are suddenly revealed as tall, grim kings in ghostly white, crowned and armed, their faces cold and terrible. And they see him perfectly. The ring did not hide him. It ushered him into the room where they already live. And this explains Tom Bombadil. Tom does not vanish when he puts the ring on, because Tom does not belong to the binary of seen and unseen in the way other beings do. He operates on an ontological plane Tolkien deliberately left unexplained. The ring has no purchase on him because there is nothing to shift. It also explains why Sauron himself does not become invisible wearing the ring. He is already mostly in the unseen. The ring amplifies his presence, but it cannot displace what is already there. Now here is where it gets beautiful, because this same mechanism is also the explanation for the second great feature of the Great Rings, the extension of mortal life. Gandalf, again by the fire at Bag End, gives us the line, "A mortal who keeps one of the great rings does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues, until at last every minute is a weariness. Does not die, does not grow, merely continues. What Gandalf is describing is stasis, not rejuvenation. The ring halts decay without supplying vitality, and the effect is achieved by the same mechanism as invisibility, by pulling the wearer incrementally out of the seen world. Time, aging, the ordinary flow of biological change, these all belong to the seen. Shift your being into the unseen, and you are no longer fully subject to them. But you are also no longer fully alive in the sense mortals understand life. Bilbo described it with perfect accuracy when he told Gandalf, "I feel all thin, sort of stretched, like butter that has been scraped over too much bread." Stretched. That is exactly what was happening. The same portion of self spread across more time. And if Bilbo had gone on wearing the ring, if he had used it often, as the 9 kings of men once used theirs, that stretching would have continued until the seen portion of him thinned away to nothing, and he walked permanently in the twilight, invisible not by choice, but by permanent ontological displacement. A wraith. Invisibility and immortality, for a mortal ring-bearer, are the same process at different points on a single line. The Nazgul are simply what happens when that process runs to completion. There is a smaller detail that confirms the reading. In the Tower of Cirith Ungol, Sam puts on the ring to hide from orcs, and quite suddenly discovers that he can understand the black speech they are shouting. Why? Because the black speech is the language of the unseen world Sauron rules. The ring opens sensory channels into that world. You can hear its tongues, you can see its inhabitants, you can be seen by them. The price for that sensory expansion is that you yourself are partly there. This, then, is what invisibility really means, not hiding, displacement. If everything we have said so far were the whole story, the ring would produce more or less the same effect on everyone who wore it. Stretch them thin, pull them toward the unseen, drive them toward wraithdom. But this is manifestly not what happens. The same object, over the course of its history, produces extraordinarily different results depending on who is holding it. Isildur is burned and betrayed within 2 years. Gollum is twisted but not dissolved across 5 centuries. Bilbo bears it for 60 years and gives it up, the first being in the ring's history ever to do so voluntarily. Boromir, who never even touches it, is corrupted by mere proximity and desire. Galadriel, offered it, recognizes instantly what she would become and refuses. Gandalf, when Frodo tries to give it to him, flinches back and says, "Do not tempt me." So what is the rule? There is a rule, and Tolkien states it in several places, though never in a single, clean formula. The effect of the ring on a given wearer scales along 3 axes. First, their native power. The greater the spirit, the greater the potential corruption. Second, their desire for rule over others. The ring can only offer what a person can be tempted by. And third, the duration and intensity of possession. Time and use compound everything. Consider Galadriel. When Frodo offers her the ring in LOTR, she does something most readers pass over too quickly. She does not pretend she could not use it. She describes in almost ecstatic detail exactly what she would become. In place of a dark lord, you would have a queen. Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain. All shall love me and despair. That speech is not rhetoric, it is self-knowledge. Galadriel understands with terrible clarity that she has the native power to wield the ring, and that the version of her who did so would be worse than Sauron, because she is greater than he is. Her refusal, "I pass the test, I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel," is not the refusal of someone who knows she couldn't manage the object. It is the refusal of someone who knows she could. Gandalf says almost the same thing in the Shire. With that power I should have power too great and terrible, and over me the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly. Now compare Sam. Sam puts the ring on in the Tower of Cirith Ungol, at the threshold of Mordor itself, where its power is near its peak. The ring duly offers him its temptation, a vision of Samwise the Strong, hero of the age, sweeping across Gorgoroth with a flaming sword, turning Mordor into a garden. And Sam laughs. The crucial passage is short and easy to miss. In that hour of trial, it was the love of his master that helped most to hold him firm. But also, deep down in him, lived still unconquered his plain hobbit sense. The one small garden of a free gardener was all his need and due, not a garden swollen to a realm. The ring could only offer Sam power over others. Sam did not want power over others. He wanted one small garden. The offer found nothing in him to hook into. It slid off. This is why Tom Bombadil is immune, by the way, though immune is perhaps the wrong word. Tom is simply indifferent. He has no will to dominate, no fear of death, no desire to extend his being. The ring's whole offer is empty for him. But as Gandalf wisely notes at the Council of Elrond, this immunity is not a solution, because Tom would also forget the ring, or throw it away, or lose interest in protecting it. A being that the ring cannot tempt is also a being that cannot be trusted to care about what happens to it. Frodo sits in the middle of all this, and his ending is the most heartbreaking application of the rule. Tolkien insisted in letter 246 that when Frodo failed at the cracks of doom, when he claimed the ring instead of destroying it, this was not a moral failure. The pressure of the ring, at its point of forging, after long possession and months of increasing torment, was impossible for anyone to resist. Frodo was never going to win that final contest. He was not the wrong hobbit for the job. He was the right one, and the ring's power simply exceeded him, as it would have exceeded anyone. Now let us address the related mystery, the ring's apparent will of its own. It slips off fingers, it swells and shrinks on command, it abandons Gollum, it betrays Isildur. Gandalf says flatly that it looks after itself. Is the ring alive? Tolkien was careful here. In letter 153, he reminded his correspondent that only Eru, the One, can give true life. No created being, not even a Valar, can make a soul. So the ring does not have its own consciousness. What it has is a concentration of Sauron's will, imprinted into its substance at the moment of forging, still active, still reaching. When the ring leaves Gollum, just as Sauron's power reawakens in Dol Guldur, it is not making its own decision. It is the Master's will, finally strong enough to reach its object from a distance, calling it home. Call it agency without soul, will without mind. The ring behaves like a subject because it carries the imprint of one, but it is always, in the end, Sauron. There is one more dimension of the ring's mechanics that must be understood, and it is the dimension that makes the climax of the Lord of the Rings possible. The ring's power is not constant. It behaves rather like a field, growing stronger the closer you come to Sauron, and stronger still the closer you come to the place of forging itself. Tom Shippey has written extensively about this. He calls it the cumulative logic of the ring. Every use makes the next use easier and harder to resist, and every mile toward Mordor adds weight to the burden. But I want to push the point a little deeper, because it follows directly from what we established at the start. If the ring is bound to Sauron and to Orodruin because Sauron poured his essence into it there, then the ring's power is not really located in the object. It is located in the tether itself. And such tethers intensify with proximity. You can watch this happen across the text. In the Shire, Bilbo wears the ring dozens of times across 60 years and retains enough of himself to give it up. At Weathertop, hundreds of miles closer to Mordor, Frodo wears it once and nearly becomes a wraith on the spot. By Mordor, the ring is so heavy that Frodo crawls on hands and knees. By the cracks of doom themselves, the place of forging, it is no longer even describable as a ring. Frodo says, "I am naked in the dark, Sam, and there is no veil between me and the wheel of fire. I begin to see it even with my waking eyes, and all else fades." A wheel of fire, not a band of gold, a vast burning circle that blots out the sensible world. And there is a detail in the Tower of Cirith Ungol that most readers pass over, but which is a perfect illustration of the principle. Sam is wearing the ring and trying to rescue Frodo. An orc called Snaga catches a glimpse of him in the shadows and reacts with sudden terror, perceiving Sam as a great warrior, a mighty elven warrior, wrapped in a grey cloud. Sam, small, tired, desperate Sam, is briefly invested with the ring's aura because he is in Mordor itself, where the ring's power is amplified by proximity to its master and its place. This is why Elrond, at the council, rejects every other proposal. The ring cannot be hidden. Its pull on Sauron's attention would only grow as his strength returned. It cannot be sent over the sea. That would be to hand it to the Valar in defiance of their own laws. It cannot be used. Any wielder would, in time, become a new Dark Lord. The only option left is the impossible one. Carry the ring into the one place in the world where its power is greatest, the one place where its maker's awareness is strongest, and drop it into the only fire that can unmake it. It is an almost cruel architecture. Sauron built a system whose destruction required the destroyer to walk into the heart of the system's strongest field, already carrying the thing that would turn against them. No power on the good side of the War of the Ring could simply outmuscle this. Strength was the wrong tool. The architecture had made strength useless. Something else would be required. We come at last to the unmaking. Why Orodruin? Why that one fire and no other? The question is not a narrative convenience. It follows strictly from everything we have said. Sauron poured his essence into the ring in those fires. The bond, Sauron, ring, place, was forged there, at that temperature, in that specific mountain that had been kindled for the purpose. Tolkien's metaphysics is careful about this. Such a tie can only be unmade by reversing the act that made it. The ring is impervious to all other damage. Gandalf tells Frodo plainly that no ordinary fire can touch it, and then adds a detail that is easy to miss in the drama of the scene. There is no smith's fire in the Shire that could change it at all. Not even the anvils and furnaces of the dwarves could do that. It has been said that dragon fire could melt and consume the rings of power, but there is not now any dragon left on earth in which the old fire is hot enough. Nor was there ever any dragon, not even Ancalagon the Black, who could have harmed the One Ring, the ruling ring, for that was made by Sauron himself. Not even Ancalagon the Black, the greatest dragon who ever lived, whose fall broke the mountains of Thangorodrim, could not have harmed the ring. Only the fire in which it was made can unmake it. And when that unmaking comes, the cascade is total. Letter 211 is the document to read on this point. If the ring is actually annihilated, Tolkien wrote, its power would be dissolved, Sauron's own being would be diminished to vanishing point, and he would be reduced to a shadow, a mere memory of malicious will. A mere memory of malicious will. Note the precision. Sauron is not killed because he is an Ainu. He cannot be killed in the ordinary sense. But everything he poured into the ring is gone, and since that was the greater part of him, what remains is a husk, an attenuated hatred with no capacity to manifest, no ability to take shape, no way to reach the world ever again. He becomes the spiritual equivalent of a fading whisper in an empty room. At the same instant, Barad-dûr falls. Its foundations, the text tells us, were made with the power of the ring, and while it remains, they will endure. When the ring goes, so does the tower, not slowly, not by ordinary collapse, but faster than gravity, because its very existence was propped up by the ring. It unmakes itself. The three rings lose their power. Rivendell, Lothlorien, the Havens, all of these had been preserved by the quiet working of Elrond's Vilya and Galadriel's Nenya and Gandalf's Narya. Now the chain is broken. The preservation ends. The elves, knowing this, prepare for the long journey west. An age ends with the ring. And here is where the final mystery of the ring arrives, the one that changes how we read the whole book. Frodo does not destroy the ring. At the lip of the cracks of doom, after carrying the burden from the Shire to Mordor, after suffering the Nazgul's knife and Shelob's sting and the slow erosion of his self, Frodo turns and says, "I have come, but I do not choose now to do what I came to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine." He claims it. He puts it on. In that moment, for the first time in history, someone other than Sauron has willingly set themselves up as the ring's master. Tolkien, in letter 246, describes the mechanical consequence. Frodo, in that moment, briefly gained a limited command over the ring's servants, enough, theoretically, to face down Nazgul if he had stood his ground. The claim was real, but it was also, in practical terms, the ring's final victory. The ordinary path to destruction had closed. No hand on earth, not Frodo's, not anyone's at that place, could now unmake it by choice. And then Gollum comes. Gollum, who should have died 50 pages earlier. Gollum, who was spared by Bilbo's pity in the caves of the Misty Mountains. Gollum, who was spared again by Frodo's mercy on the slopes of the Emyn Muil. Gollum, whose continued existence seems for most of the story like a mistake, an untied thread, a kindness the world will not repay. He bites off Frodo's finger, he dances with the ring, he falls. The ring is unmade not because anyone destroyed it, but because the accumulated mercy of its bearers, Bilbo's pity, Frodo's pity, the long choice to spare rather than to kill, had placed the one being capable of breaking the final bond exactly where he needed to be, in exactly the state of obsession that would make him fall. Tolkien called this eucatastrophe, the unexpected turn, the sudden joy that breaks through when every calculation has failed. And for Tolkien, who was writing out of a Catholic imagination, it was also the fingerprint of providence. Frodo, he said, had done what he could and spent himself completely as an instrument of providence. The ring was destroyed by grace, working through the small kindnesses of small people across decades. So, how does the One Ring actually work? It works by binding Sauron to an object, and through that object to a network of lesser rings, and through that network to the minds of their wearers, and thus to a great portion of the free peoples of Middle-earth. It works by shifting whoever wears it between the seen and the unseen, stretching them thin, preserving their bodies while hollowing out their selves. It works by amplifying whatever lust for rule already lives in the one who holds it, and by carrying Sauron's residual will even when its master is half a world away. And it is unmade by the one thing its architecture could not account for, not by strength, not by strategy, by pity, and by the long, patient working of something greater than any of those who carried it could see. The ring was a perfect instrument of domination. It failed because the world it was built to rule is not, in the end, ruled by domination at all. What remains, then, is the deepest irony of Tolkien's most famous invention, Sauron built a perfect machine for ruling others, and poured so much of himself into it that his own existence became dependent on the thing he used to dominate the world. The architecture was flawless. The only flaw was that it could not account for mercy. For the small choices of small people, a pity here, a sparing there, whose accumulated weight across decades set down Gollum at the one spot in the world where the bond could finally break. A ring of pure domination, undone by the one force its maker could not imagine. If this walk through the ring's inner workings was useful, subscribe to Ranger of the Realms for more careful journeys through Tolkien's legendarium. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which of the ring's mechanics surprised you most? May you find light in unexpected places.